Hello, bonjour, welcome to France Today Live. I'm Sophie Gardner-Robertson, the web editor for France Today and your host for this event on French cheese. Our guest today is Ned Palmer, who is here to talk about his book, A Cheesemonger's Tour de France. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Ned to join me by switching on his camera and microphone.
Hi, Sylvie.
Hi. How are you?
Thank you.
Oh, it's lovely to have you. I just have a short word of introduction about you. Ned Palmer is a British cheesemonger and author and a former jazz pianist. He learned his craft at Neal's Yard Dairy, who dispatched him to farms and dairies across Britain and Ireland. It was during one such visit to Mary Holbrook's farm in Somerset that he came up with the idea of his best-selling A Cheesemonger's History of the British Isles, published in 2019. Realizing that her fresh, I'm not sure how to pronounce this one, slakelet cheese?
Slakelet. Good. Good.
A Cheesemonger's Tour de France was an obvious next step, an homage to Fromage. All right, Ned, I'll let you take the floor and give us your presentation.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for that lovely intro, and thanks everyone for joining. I thought I'd read a little bit from the introduction, which wouldn't be too much of a spoiler, because hopefully you'd buy the whole book. Because I think it explains what I'm trying to do here. So here we go. I began my cheesemonger's Tour de France in Paris, or more specifically, I sat down to lunch at the Café de Musée in the Marais. Opened in the 1920s, this is the quintessential Parisian bistro, with pretty mosaic floors, companionably huddled tables, and menus chalked up on blackboards. I ordered a chunky terrine de campagne, followed by Boeuf Bourguignon, the best in France, it has been said, by the restaurant, and finally applied myself to the cheese board. On this particular Sunday, I chose a plump slice of brie, its rumpled white duvet of Orion flecked pink and orange, a long tranche of golden-hued Comté, and a piece of blue-veined Roquefort, all served with a peppery salad. Just the three cheeses, though I was sorely tempted by some fawn-coloured ossory rôti and a little wedge of Crottin's goat's cheese. Here in this Parisian bistro, La France Profonde was laid out before me. Each mouthful of each cheese carried with it something of the culture and the specific environment, the terroir, of its place of origin or pays. Brie's rich golden colour speaks of the lush pastures of the Ile-de-France, the historical region centred on Paris. Comté owns its distinctive character, gigantic size, hard texture and sweet and nutty flavour, to the altitude at which it was originally produced in the Franche-Comté region. Roquefort, which gives its name to penicillin roqueforti, the blue mould that permeates all the world's blue cheeses, has the smallest terroir of any cheese in the world. Whilst Urati's name speaks of the disputed nationality of its Pyrenean homeland, the cheesemakers still take their flocks up into the very highest pastures in spring. Crottin, made in the Val de Loire, appeared on the national cheese board as a result of a 19th century tragedy, the phylloxera epidemic, which killed most of France's vine stock and nearly wiped out the wine industry. I'll just tell you there's a happy end to that bit. It's a book about terroir, which we usually apply to wine, but you can apply to cheese. In its simplest form, terroir is about the soil, literally, because it comes from the root la terre, and the quality of that soil would affect the cheese. So do the plants that grow there, and different plants, different areas, the local climate, the elevation. But there's a lot more to terroir than that. For me, terroir there's a human terroir of the culture of the people who make the cheese and the time that a particular cheese was born in and the locality of the place that it comes from. When you eat French cheese, you're eating France. You can eat your way around France by eating its cheese. Now, here's the cover of my book. I can say that because I didn't make this cover. My lovely publishers did. France has a lot of terroir. The book has to be finite. So I picked just 11 regions. Each region is a chapter, and each chapter has a cheese that characterizes that region to explore the place. We're going to do a little mini Tour de France tonight because, if I did the whole book, we'd be here for hours. We're going to start in Normandy in the northwest with Camembert. Here is the Camembert, described as the flower of French cheese by a Normandy writer, unsurprisingly. It's from the Pays d'Auge, which is in the west of Normandy, close to the coast. So the terroir here has that simplest description of terroir I gave, in that it's close to the coast. You get that wet, temperate climate. So you get lots of lovely, lush grass. Auvergne is also a pretty hilly, rumpled country. That classic terroir of Auvergne that is from the village of Camembert itself, looking out over the little fields. In the rest of Normandy throughout the 20th century, they were grubbing up the hedgerows to create massive agribusiness fields for modern agriculture. You can't do it in Auvergne because the country's so hilly that it's impossible to do. So the terroir not only created the flavour of the cheese, it kind of protected the cheese from modernity. I brought some with me tonight. Here is a She's so perfect. I just want to get that focus on it. Now, when you choose a Camembert, here's a bit of instruction for you all. If you go to a supermarket, you'll notice that they just have a pure white and very flat rind. It looks like a snowfield, like a virgin snowfield. So it would have a very simple flavour, no complexity. This has that amazing rumpled texture. There's different colours in the rind. So that's going to have that really lovely, complex flavour. France is the centre of excellence. So this is a mould ripened cheese, by the way. It's very obvious. In fact, I'll cut into it. I might not eat any just now because it might be a bit weird for you guys to see me just sitting here. This is one of the greatest Camemberts. It's from Fromage called Mons. They have a sister business in Britain, Mons UK. Set up, but Hubert Mons is now run by his son. You can see here that the rind on the outside is ripening the cheese, softening it, breaking it down. So we call the edge under the rind the breakdown. Here you can see it's completely broken down. It's totally ripened. So it has that wonderful, slightly sulfuric, earthy flavour. Just a beautiful example of a really amazing cheese. I love that. Well, let's head east now. I'll just tell you a thing. So I said France is the centre of excellence for mould ripened cheese. Cheesemaking was first appeared in the Fertile Crescent. That is modern Iraq, Turkey, Iran, that area. Those cheeses were soft, fresh cheeses, or cheeses like feta. It's a hot country. You can't make cheeses like this. They would just go crazy. So all the cheese was either soft and fresh and young, like a queso fresco, or it was brine cheese like feta. As people spread up into Europe, what we think happened, especially in those got to northern France, it's a cooler climate. It's very moist. Their cheeses would have grown mold on them. Peasant farmers are frugal and they will just eat everything. So they ate these mold covered cheeses and thought, well, it's quite nice. So they then had to figure out how to allow that mold to grow, how to control it, how to develop it and make that perfect. I think that's really perfect skin there. So there is an idea that it was the peasant farmers of France before Christianity who developed mold ripened cheese. One of the many things the French could be proud of. Now we're going to head south to Provence. This is a little goat's cheese called Mistral. Provence is full of hundreds of pretty little goat's cheeses. There's something really beautiful about the goat's cheeses in Provence. So it was really difficult to choose a single one to characterize the region. And I actually chose a cheese called Bouchette de Manon, which is a little log of cheese. Yeah. Now, it's late in the season for goat's milk. You usually get goat's cheese in the spring and summer. You get less and less in autumn. I rang my friend at Mons UK this morning and I said, I want to get a Bouchette. He said, they're like soup, Ned. So they've gone completely liquid. He said, have a Mistral instead. This is a tiny goat's cheese. It's the sister of a cheese called Banon, which is a more famous version of it with an actual AOC. You can see it's wrapped in a chestnut leaf. I think that expresses the terroir beautifully because there are a lot of chestnut trees in Provence. They grow locally. And you wrap the cheese in the chestnut, it softens it and it adds a little bit of its nutty flavour to the cheese. But there's a much bigger sense of terroir for me in Provence, which is that it's goat country. It's also very beautiful. This is the farm of a lovely couple called the Mistral. That's from the top of this hill. It's quite close to Vaucluse. That's why people want to go to Provence, because it's incredibly beautiful.
Yes.
And it's very much goat country. It looks quite lush there, but most of Provence is pretty dry. The vegetation is quite scrubby. It's quite a harsh place in a way, and it's not good for cows. You'd be insane to try and raise cattle in Provence, but it's great for goats. Goats love rough country. Goats eat anything. If you get too close to them, they will eat your clothes. In a way, for me, the terroir is a bit like the mountain cheese. It's what you have to make. And so you make goat's milk cheese. The other reason I went is because in the last 20 years or so, there's been a sort of movement amongst some of these goat's cheese producers, led by a man called François Borel, to return a particular breed of goat called Rove, who are indigenous to Provence. Most goat's cheese now in the world is made from a couple of breeds that are really international. A bit like the cow, you have these Alpine and Saranen goats that everybody uses. In order to bring back this breed, they thought, well, we should just have it. Also, it's really evolved to live in that landscape. Their plan was to make cheese from their milk. Therefore, we can support bringing back the Rove goats. I've wanted for all my mongering life, 24 years, to see a Rove goat. They're just hilarious. Aren't they amazing? They're famous for those horns, and they're like a lyre, you know, the Greek instrument. They're just absolutely lovely.
Wow.
And François Master, every day, so he makes cheese in the morning, milks the goats, he makes cheese, and then at lunchtime, he takes them further up into the sort of scrubby forest kind of pasture, which they love to be in. They love to eat. And he spends the afternoon up there with them in the garrigue because he loves his goats. It's just really, really sweet thing to do. Like I said, cheesemakers are lovely. Provence is exactly what you want it to be. It's one of those places, a bit like Paris for me. When I go to Paris, I feel like I'm in a film.
Yes.
And the first time I went to Provence, I got out of the car. It's hot. It smells of hot stone and burnt earth, and it smells of herbs, thyme and sarriette. I thought, this is exactly what I want. At lunchtime, I finally understood rosé. Just have it in Provence. You realise, oh my God, it is delicious. It works perfectly here. Something about the hot stone, and it works perfectly with these pretty little goat's cheeses of Provence. So another lovely idea of terroir is the idea of matching your wines with the cheeses of the region. The final stop on this tour of France is to head west to Auvergne for a cheese called Roquefort, probably one of the most famous cheeses, one of the many cheeses that is crowned King of Cheese. Brie was crowned King of Cheese in 1815 at the Congress of Vienna. The British say that cheddar is the King of Cheese, and the people of Auvergne say that Roquefort is the King of Cheese. It has the smallest terroir of any product I can think of, because to be Roquefort, it has to be matured in caves underneath the village of Roquefort-sur-Soulzon, which straggles along the edge of this limestone outcrop in Auvergne called Montcombalou, an incredibly beautiful place. So that the village literally goes along the bottom of there. There's an idea that Caesar once visited and sat on the top of that outcrop eating Roquefort and drinking wine, but everywhere you go in France, there's somewhere that Caesar has. You guys have a really interesting attitude to Caesar, because there's Asterix, and at the same time he's like a kind of heroic figure.
Yes.
One of the most amazing visits that I had in France was to visit these caves underneath Roquefort-sur-Soulzon. The woman called Delphine Carl, whose family have made Roquefort for 3 generations. You go into a little shop, and in the back of the shop is a door, and you go through this door and it's like the TARDIS. I don't bigger on the inside than the
Yeah.
outside. You go down on these wooden stairs to the very bottom, and it feels like you're going back in time. The boards the cheeses are on are made of oak. They're only harvested at a certain time of year when the moon is full. I think it's October, November, but it has to be during a full moon. I don't know why, but they're obviously doing something right because the cheese is amazing. They are black with age and shiny because the sheep's milk has lots of fat in it, and that fat's soaked into the boards. And it looks like this.
Oh,
It made me think of the hold of an 18th century freight ship. You feel like you're in an old ship.
totally.
Just so beautiful. Yeah. The walls they're just rock. They're covered in cobwebs because you mustn't clean anything out because of all the natural mold and bacteria. In England, an environmental health officer would freak out and close it down immediately. But the French are much more sensible. The boards, the thick oak, acts like a humidifier. Well, it controls humidity. So if the carve is too dry, the moisture seeps out of the boards and makes it moist. If it's too wet, the boards suck in the moisture.
Okay.
When I worked in a cellar in England, we had to have a humidifier running all the time. So it uses power, it costs money, and it creates heat because of the motor working. So then you have to deal with the heat and refrigerate. The other special thing about the caves and about Mont Combalu is these cracks that run through the entire part of that limestone outcrop. They're called fleurines, and the air comes in from the top and one end and gently comes through like breath through the limestone and into the caves, just at the right velocity and coolness, picking up all that limestone to aerate the cheeses. So when I was with Delphine, she said, my carve, or our carves here in Soissons, are the envy of everyone else in the world because everyone else has to use refrigeration and humidification and they have to use power. Here it just happens naturally.
Wow.
You know, it's another of the times that I was feeling a bit teary
Yeah.
when I was in there. People have done it this way for thousands of years. It's a really ancient practice. They have one fleurine and there's a little wooden door closing it off, and it leads down a passage to the crypt of the church. They call that fleurine the breath of God. So Delphine's cheeses are matured by the breath of God.
Oh gosh.
In France, you have the AOC, Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, which inspired the rest of Europe and the world to develop PDO system, protected domain of origin. And Roquefort has the oldest PDO of any product in the world, which shows how sensible the French are, particularly about cheese. It was set up in 1407 in the 15th century by Charles VI, and he gave the people of Roquefort a charter saying, you know, only you can call your cheese by this name. He was also known as Charles the Mad. He believed he was made of glass and had to move carefully in case he got broken. But the people of Auvergne call him Charles the Good. That's it for my little tour.
Thank you, Ned.
So we have lots of time for questions.
I actually had a question on Camembert. I recently found out the real Camembert, the real traditional recipe, or at least what you should actually buy, is the à la louche. Could you explain the difference between the à la louche Camembert and the Camembert that one can find in the supermarket and which one to go for?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you. À la louche is about a method, and it's about ladling the curd into the mold. So maybe a little explaining about cheese making.
Yeah.
To make cheese, you get milk. Milk is full of sugar, lactose. You add bacterial culture to the milk. I was talking about this thermophilic cultures before, which consumes the lactose, converts it into lactic acid. It also starts to squeeze out the moisture from the cheese. So very simple cheese, the most primitive ancient cheese would have been just using that culture, would be a soft, fresh cheese. So Philadelphia is the most authentic cheese in the world, the most ancient form of cheese. To make the cheese firmer so that you end up with a hard cheese like Comté, you add rennet, an enzyme that coagulates the milk. At that point, you have the curd, which is the texture of crème carré or blancmange. You transfer that curd into molds with holes for the liquid to drain out. In modern cheese-making factories, you just pour that in. But curd is very delicate. To make a really creamy cheese, you do this by hand and ladle the curd into the molds. It's a beautiful thing to watch. It looks like Tai Chi. You need to be really slow and gentle. You need to make every ladle fall the same size to make it consistent.
Okay.
And obviously that is quite hard work. It's very skillful. And you have to pay more people to do it. So the modern producers just want to use machines and they won't get that lovely texture. Moulé à la louche, you'll see it on the box of the Camembert. It tells you that that's proper.
Proper Camembert.
Proper Camembert. There is another part to this story, but we could leave that. If there are more questions, we could go back.
We have a question from Donna, who I think is from the US, because her question is about your thoughts on the use of fermentation-produced chymosin. She says that she's read that 90% of cheeses in the USA are made using this GMO rennet. And what is your advice on how to avoid it, given that labels don't always list it?
Firstly, excellent cheese knowledge, Donna. That's very impressive. I'm afraid I know nothing about American regulations on labelling. So I'm going to speak from a position of semi-ignorance. Rennet, most natural traditional rennet comes from the stomach of an animal. It's not a particularly appetizing thought, but there it is. There was other traditional rennet. People in Portugal used the juice from thistles, which will also do that coagulation. But modern vegetarian rennet comes either from a fungus that's been bred to produce rennet, or, and this is more strange, it comes from the E. coli bacteria, which has been genetically altered to produce chymosin, the actual active ingredient in rennet, the enzyme. The producers of this rennet are keen to point out that the rennet itself is not a GMO. It's the tailored bacteria that's the GMO. So don't worry, you're not consuming a GMO when you consume rennet. Make of that what you will. I guess one thing, if it said traditional rennet on the packaging, then I would usually assume it was animal rennet and not the fermentation produced rennet. If it was a more traditional style of cheese, I would expect them to be using traditional rennet, either animal or vegetable. There's a sort of corollary to that, is that a lot of people don't think there's much traditional cheese making in America, but people have been making cheese in America since the 17th century. The first governor of Massachusetts was a cheesemaker, so there is plenty of excellent traditional cheese in America. It's just that the Americans themselves, in particular the French, don't believe that. I hope that was a sort of answer, Donna.
Another question from Marisa. She's asking, what was your favorite cheese from your tour and why?
Gosh. Well, there's a really easy answer. I have a really big love for the Auvergne, and even more than Provence, I'd wanted to go to the Auvergne for so long. I love rugged country. I love North Yorkshire and I love the Highlands, and the Auvergne is like that. I love a cheese called Salaire. There's a family of cheeses, and one is called Comtal. They're basically the same, but Comtal has a much broader AOC. You could make it with pasteurized milk. You can make it with several beets. For Salaire Tradition, you have to use the Salaire cow. I love Salaire cows too. They've got huge horns. You know them, Sophie. You can't milk them unless their calf is there. You let the calf have some milk and then milk them. The cheese in that simple form of terroir, it has a very volcanic place with mineral soil, and the cheese has a minerality. It expresses the soul of the people so much. There's a rugged people and a rugged cheese. So in a lot of ways, going to Auvergne was one of my most amazing moments. They make it in wooden vats, a geôle, with no starter culture. You just use the raw milk, so it naturally sours, and that is really ancient.
Yeah.
methods. Lots of crying in Auvergne at the beauty and everything.
I have a soft spot for Auvergne. It's so beautiful.
Oh, cool. It is lovely. I started out asking, because the book is also, to me, it's kind of about exploring the idea of France and what is France. So I started asking people, what's the Frenchest part of France? What is the most French part? And then I stopped because every person says it's here.
Yeah.
Alsacien, or guys from Paris or Breton. But Laurent Mons, whose brother Hervé is the boss of Mons Fromage, said Auvergne is the most French part because it's so far from any other borders that it was never really invaded, so it stayed French, which I kind of like that concept.
Madeline has asked, is Comté best used heated up?
I have no preference. It's a versatile cheese, and it makes me think of cheddar. I would have Comté at quite young, even 6 months, which I discovered when I was in Longsaunier. I had 6 month Comté and thought it was beautiful, really fruity, really mild. You can have it at 12 to 14, 24, 6 months, and they all have their own character. I love it on a cheese board with a glass of vin jaune. I love it in a sandwich with cooked ham or saucisse de morteau, which is from the region, so the idea of terroir as well. And then I love it melted, obviously, in fondue, or it's a cheese that melts into the stringiness. So I have no preference. I love it all.
I think I do too. Comté is
amazing, isn't it? Just one of the greatest cheeses in the world.
What was the most surprising or weird technique that you came across?
Cool. In a way, one of the most surprising things is what I talked about with visiting Fromage. It looks like a factory. You think, oh no, this is not going to be a very authentic experience for me. My very first trip was to Seine-et-Marne to see a brie producer. They are set up by Rothschilds because there were no fermier producers of brie left in its home pays. Fermier, they own their own cows. The milk comes straight from the field. Laiterie is when you buy milk. It's not untraditional. People have done it a long time. But Edmund Rothschild realized there was no fermier brie, and he wanted to reinvigorate that tradition. But when I went there, again, from the outside, kind of looked like a bit of a factory, and it's owned by this rich guy, like Mrs. Hulot and her 10 cows. And the brie is amazing. Didier's head cheesemaker, he uses his senses, his intuition. And I saw this a lot. A lot of French cheesemakers used more modern kit than I've seen in small producers in Britain. And I realized that we're breaking our backs doing things that to change it to a modern thing wouldn't lose any quality of the cheese. So another surprising thing is when they make Comté, it's a great big thing like a vacuum cleaner which goes down into the vat, sucks all the curd up and moves it and spits it out into the mold. And the first time I saw this a long time ago now, I was kind of horrified. And my friend said, but it's good cheese, isn't it, Ned? I said, it's really good. She said, could it be any better? I said, no, it couldn't be any better. So it's okay, right?
Yeah.
So generally, it took a long time for that romantic naive to be stripped away. If there's a process that can make it easier for the cheesemaker, especially physically, it's very hard work, that doesn't affect the quality. It was almost strange to me that there were more producers I visit in Britain who are doing things in more old-fashioned ways. They haven't got around to doing that. Then the other thing is the Giraud that has the wooden vats that you make Salaire in, because Salaire is a hard cheese. So every single other hard cheese I've seen, you have to heat the milk. It took me standing there watching it, having known that cheese and sold it for a long time, that they weren't heated. There's no heat. They're not heating it. Cheryl makes it was laughing. He just uses lots of rennet. He poured lots of rennet. And he said, why do you think this is, Ned? I said, well, no. So there's no wood. There's no big forests. Wood is really expensive. We couldn't afford it. So we use rennet. And so they're a lovely, elegant solution. But that was kind of a surprise. I was surprised a lot. I'm not allowed. My editor kept taking out the bits where I said, I never knew this until I arrived here, because he said, no, you have to sound like you know what you're talking about now.
Donna, who came back to us just to say that she's going to stick to ordering her cheese from France.
Okay, there is Jasper Hill, an amazing cheesemaker in Vermont. I very much doubt they are using GMO rennet. That's one great producer. I'm sure the American Cheese Society, the ACS, would be happy to give you a list of non-GMO cheesemakers.
And that's a good tip. And we have one final question. In your visits, did you notice any cheesemaking practices that are being adapted by new generations to changing consumer preferences or climate change?
Cool question. So, a lot. And again, it kind of surprised me. And I apologize for a rather stereotype view of the French at being, stubborn, people sticking to their old ways. For everywhere, they're having to deal with the climate emergency. And so the AOCs that protect certain cheeses like Comté or Roquefort, they have very strict rules, for example, for when the animals must go out from the winter barns and eat pasture. And the AOCs have had to be flexible about when that can happen. So they are responding to the changes in a way that would almost be surprising, because you think an AOC is there to protect a very rigid way of doing things. And another thing that I found kind of heartwarming is the AOC board is made up of actual producers. So you have fermier producers, laiterie producers, and you have larger scale industrial producers, and they are all working together. And I like the idea that everyone's working together. In many ways, one of the most exciting places to go is Brittany, because Brittany had no tradition of cheesemaking. And they've been going through a sort of, not a renaissance, but a naissance of cheesemaking since the 80s. So there are loads of small producers. They're not stuck in tradition because they have no traditional style. So they can borrow from other traditions, and they make mixtures from different bay in France. A couple of people make a cheese a bit like cheddar, but it has the terroir of Brittany. And they in particular were really keen on sustainability, on short supply chains, so really trying to sell locally, really trying to provide the feed and fuel and inputs locally, trying to minimize inputs. A lot of people using really geeky anaerobic whey digesters. So you take the liquid off the cheese making and you put it into an anaerobic digester, and it produces methane, which you can use to power your dairy. So those all sound like very modern things to be sustainable, to think about the environment, to use some tech like that. And they are. I loved seeing that. At the same time, those are really ancient practices, because cheese making was a way of using all your resources in the most elegant, efficient way. I was watching tradition and modernity at the same time. It was pretty amazing.
Ned, thank you so much. That was so fascinating. I love the way you talked about cheese with philosophy and with full passion and love. It was so interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie.
Have a lovely evening where we are in the world, and for our audiences in the US, have a lovely rest of the day. Merci beaucoup. À bientôt.
Merci à vous. Au revoir.
Au revoir.